Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, your excellencies, we've heard it from Minister Gerlach and the MEP Ferber. They've pretty much set up the agenda for the next forum we're going to have, and that is the digital sovereignty in the EU. It's one of the goals that the EU has set for itself, but how will it look like? What will the process of getting to that goal be? And would it be similar to the digital sovereignty of the US or to Chinese, or how will it differ? We'll find out in the next panel. And I'm more than happy to pass the floor to my dear colleague from Info.cz, the head of our EU section, Karel Barták. Karel, enjoy, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Prague European Summit and welcome to this debate, which will be, as you have heard from the two video messages, surprise, surprise, it's going to be again about digitization. You know that our societies have been going digital for some time, and digital development is having an ever stronger impact on global affairs. For today's debate, we have chosen the more political segment of the huge digital agenda, and we have chosen of the plenty of dimensions Mr. Ferber was referring to, we've chosen those which are more related to policy making, not the technicalities. We can leave that for another discussion. We will be discussing the impact of digital evolution on the political thinking and practice. The question of digital sovereignty, which was placed as the slogan of this panel, has been on the agenda for some time, and there are very different, types of understanding of this notion. It is a natural reaction to a situation which has the situation in which big multinational corporations behave as they wish, basically, and the nation states cannot do much about it. The most visible aspects of this situation are currently security and taxation. We are in the middle of a discussion after many years of struggle by different actors on the global stage. We are now witnessing the G20 countries debating and endorsing to a large extent the proposed OECD approach to the taxation question, which has already been agreed in principle by the G7 in early summer. So things are moving rather fast, and the digital shift, which is entering now an interesting and extremely challenging phases. We can also see that the European Union is keen to play a prominent role in this development, and it has placed the digital on the top of its priorities together with the Green Deal. By the way, let me please also draw your attention to the very good text on this topic by Nicola Schmidt and Linda Monsis, published in the booklet which was distributed at this Prague European Summit. So our debate is going to last for now something like 50 minutes. After the initial exchanges between the speakers, we will open the floor to the questions from the audience, be it here in the meeting room or for those following us remotely. I think that you got used already to the system now, but nevertheless I will remind you that those of you watching on your computers, if you wish to ask questions, please go to the www.sli.do and enter the event code to join the conversation. So I'm happy and proud to introduce 4 excellent speakers, true experts in the digitization ecosystems. Let me please start with the ladies. We have with us physically present Lucie Kadlecová, Senior Associate at the CybExer Technologies, specialist in cybersecurity and author of several publications on this topic. Remotely, we will have the pleasure to discuss with Aura Sala, who is currently the head of the EU affairs with Facebook, which makes her an unmissable partner for any discussion about big tech and digitization in Europe, even more due to the fact that she has a great experience inside the European Commission as well. Mr. Pawel Swieboda, currently Director General of the Human Brain Project, used to work at the helm of the European Policy Strategy Center, which was an in-house think tank under the previous President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. And we will have the pleasure to hear from Florian Markus from Estonia, Tallinn, where he works as Digital Transformation Advisor at the e-Estonia Briefing Center. Given the exceptional role of Estonia as the European frontrunner in cyber and digital transformation, we will have the opportunity to listen to someone who is directly and deeply involved in the process. So let me please kick off by asking all four of you the same question or a couple of related questions. How do you understand the notion of digital sovereignty? Is it in your mind a necessary step in the evolution of the online world, or perhaps an unnecessary obstacle? Does it make sense to speak about sovereignty when the big tech are by definition global and are not willing to respect national regulation? Do you consider that the European Union could become the global player properly representing the EU member states in this challenging endeavor? So I will start perhaps with Mrs. Sala, if you would be so kind and give a brief statement on this first question.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. Hopefully next year again physically present. Let me start by addressing some of the things that we heard from the video messages and from you already. As we all know, it has long been the vision of European policymakers to make this continent of center of digital innovation when we are trying to compete with the US and China. Maybe I'm not the right person to say this coming from the US company, however, I'm a wholehearted European myself. With almost 500 million people across some of the world's advanced economies that we have in the EU, there is really not an inherent reason why Europe should really lag behind. I'm sure that we will see European digital champions rather soon, but of course this requires the EU to get the regulatory framework right. And much of what the EU aims to do is admirably rooted in values like free expression, privacy, transparency, and the right of individuals. As the new rules are written at the moment, these values must be actively protected. But as the internet fragments, Europe faces a fundamental choice. Does it design rules to keep the internet open and global, or does it build barriers for the bloc alone? And this is the question I think we need to also address here today. The temptation to do the latter is understandable, especially as other nations flex their digital muscles at the moment. But Europe's competitiveness remains dependent on open global markets and unhindered trade within the single market. It is worrying that some regulators and some governments in the EU are increasingly acting unilaterally within the EU. A shift towards digital protectionism would be self-defeating, really. Far from putting Europe at the cutting edge, it could accelerate the splintering of internet, leaving Europe a bystander as US and China companies really dominate. European policymakers need to maximize the bloc's advantages now. Let's say top quality talent, a large consumer market, one of the biggest in the world, first-class universities, and address its deficiencies, the lack of deep and liquid capital markets, and patchy commitment to entrepreneurialism and innovation. But above all, EU decision makers need to create a genuine borderless European-wide market. I think we can all agree on that. If numerous political declarations in favor of digital single market were accompanied by action and implementation, that would already have become a reality. But it isn't. To sell across the EU still has to navigate different intellectual property laws, licensing rules, and obstacles to deliver of goods. This is even more urgent in the current post-pandemic economic recovery as businesses use data and digital tools to rebuild. We see this across our platforms. Reaching customers online is now central how Europeans do business. Last but not least, sovereignty versus competitiveness is a false choice. The EU can have both, and it should. We should remove these barriers without creating new ones for businesses seeking to reach the vast majority of the world's online and beyond EU borders. After all, it's a mission to tear down walls, not to build new ones.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for covering a whole range of the topics which we are supposed to discuss here today. So now perhaps we could be going deeper, but I will ask Mr. Swieboda for the initial statement. Perhaps, just having a reference to what has just been said, is it really digital sovereignty versus digital protectionism?
Thank you very much, Karol, and it's a pity that I could not attend in physical form this year. I've been to the Prague European Summit for a number of years, and this has always been a great experience. Now, you ask digital sovereignty versus digital protectionism. I think, to me, sovereignty is about empowerment. It is about putting fuel into the machine. It is about giving us an opportunity to succeed. And I look at it in three ways. First of all, digital sovereignty to me is about democracy. So it is about something that is most precious to us. And it is about deciding in an unconstrained manner about our own affairs, our own course of action. And I say unconstrained because, of course, in the digital age, our democracies are under constant bombardment and interference. And in that sense, they have to be resilient. Now, is it protectionism? I don't think so. I think it is about preserving our ability to shape our own future the way we want to, without anybody's impact from the outside. The same applies to the economy, because we also need to be able to build economic value without being held back by others, be it foreign powers or be it large companies that aim to dominate the markets. And zooming into the area where I work right now, science, digital sovereignty has huge relevance for science because it is about empowering science. It is about investing in the tools that can help us move the needle in science, which is crucial to our future prosperity. So we should not limit ourselves only to the big tech companies, some of which are sort of more media companies than tech companies. We should look at the entire spectrum, and it's across that entire spectrum where the concept of digital sovereignty makes a lot of sense.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor now to Mrs. Kadlecová on the same topic.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's very refreshing after the pandemics to actually meet people in person and even without the face mask. So thank you for that, and also thank you for having this discussion, which is clearly very important and very topical. I will try to offer a slightly different point of view on the issue, because as Mr. Barták mentioned, there are different points of view how to look at digital sovereignty. One of them is security. And I would like to offer a bit more general, but also a bit more universal point of view. And that starts with a simple and very elementary premise, and that is that cyberspace or internet, but I would rather use cyberspace to be more general, is just an extension of our day-to-day life. It's an extension of our physical life. Whatever we live outside of cyberspace, we also very often extend to cyberspace. And it is very same with international relations and international politics. Whatever you can see in the physical world also moves, whatever relations, whatever dynamics, also moves to cyberspace. And so I believe it is only natural that sovereignty as a key concept, cornerstone of international relations, but also international law, moves also to cyberspace. And even today, we can see already now different types of sovereignty which are exercised in online, be it now we are talking about digital sovereignty, but we can also see what is called Westphalian sovereignty, international legal sovereignty, domestic sovereignty. It's all interlinked, one dependent on the other. And so, although we can see this kind of extension of the concept of sovereignty into cyberspace, we can also see slight modification. But what stays the same is the two elementary or the basic elements of sovereignty, and that is that authority and control is exercised over given territory and people. And so I think that digital sovereignty, or sovereignty in general, in cyberspace is just a natural process. It's just a natural evolution of the concept, given the development of cyberspace, and cyberspace or online becoming an integral part of our life. And so I think that it is just natural, and that we have to take the advantage of that and try to promote democratic values, but also whatever we live in the physical world.
Thank you. Thank you for your, let's say, different angle but optimistic vision of the process. Florian?
Yeah, I would want to build on what Ms. Kadlecová just said, the extension of the sort of physical sphere and the physical and ethical types of sovereignty that we're talking about in politics on a daily basis has just very naturally expanded and extended into the digital sphere as well. What we can also see, just if we talk about just countries' diplomacy, that big countries can afford very different actions than smaller countries. Estonia has a handful of representatives in the European Parliament. They will not change any policy on their own. So big countries, small countries, they all play by roughly different rules to some extent. What the EU, and to bring this back to the EU digital level, what the EU can do is to create such a gravitas on the global scale that it will no longer, you can no longer term it protectionism, but rather it's just a sphere of its own that influences spheres on its vicinity. What we see very clearly, for example, with the GDPR was that it's not just EU member states that look at the GDPR and implementing their own versions of it, but also adjacent countries such as the UK, but also rather far away countries, geographically speaking, such as Argentina and Brazil, are looking at their own implementations of the GDPR. And I think that the same can be said about the Digital Markets Act and so on. If we, as the EU, act more or less as one, then we will quite naturally create this sort of gravitational force that other nations will feel compelled to, if not join, which is perfectly fine, at least also adhere to in some extent. And the other aspect that I just want to mention very quickly, of course, the first mover advantage of the US and China in different aspects of the field is undeniable. And I think this is self-made. To the EU as well. If we think about even the very basic notion, how easy is it in your home countries, back at home and also on the chairs, how easy is it in your country to create a company, you know? So if we think about lots of bureaucracy, if we think about lots of regulations and so on, these issues are to a large extent self-made, and this also means that we as European citizens should take the opportunity to renew our internal regulations and procedures.
Well, Thank you very much. It makes it, kind of round up of the first question, and stepping up from there, I would like to perhaps a follow-up question to Mrs. Sala, despite the fact that perhaps Facebook is not the representative of everything that's happening in the cyberspace, but in a way it is an extremely important company, and by the very nature it is a global company, and perhaps it is not really very much in favor of supplementary regulation which differs from one country to another. How do you feel about the European regulatory effort, and in the last couple of days, above all, the effort to have some kind of harmonized taxation rules at the European level, even Europe contributing to the global level effort? Do you think that we might be even having a taxation deal in 2021? And is that something which makes your life easier, or is it something that you would be not very happy with?
Yeah, thank you so much. Excellent question. First, let me start by saying that we have actually asked for regulation for a long time, as you know, because for us it would be, of course, much easier if we will see as much EU level regulation as possible. As I was referring earlier also, that would also be the benefit of a single market if we would have an EU level harmonized rules. And we also think that it's really important that these decisions are not left to private companies like ourselves. At the moment, we rely on our community standards. So basically, when you enter to any of our platforms, you sign up to these community standards, how you behave on our platforms. But we don't think it's enough. So that's why we were among the first signatories of Code of Practice on Disinformation when the Commission made this call. And now, of course, we are renewing the code together with the other companies and the European Commission, and we warmly welcome this initiative. But we also think that there is a requirement for binding regulation, and that's what we are asking. Is it then about privacy? Is it transparency? It belongs to the democratically elected decision makers to make these laws. And that's why we have welcomed the initiatives of the DSA and DMA, for example. Now we are in a crucial moment to getting those regulations right, so that actually we can see those European digital champions. Because one thing I would like to correct here is that you cannot just make a law for 4 or 5 biggest American companies. The law is the same for everyone. So if we want to see this, we need to make sure that it doesn't fragment our market, and it gives these companies possibility to thrive in their home continent. About the taxation, we welcomed the G7 tax deal, and we acknowledge that it means we could be paying more taxes, and that's of course okay for us. We think that we should have an OECD level solution. It would be worrisome again for Europe if the EU is having something separate. So that's why we think it's important to have these global rules, and we have been long and actively supported this OECD process. Having said that, I have to also emphasize that Facebook pays a significant tax at the moment. As a US company, much of our tax is, of course, paid in the US, where we have significant functions and operations. However, we also pay taxes elsewhere, and we are fully compliant by the laws in different member states. But to conclude, yes, we welcome the OECD solution and hopefully implementation rather sooner than later.
Thank you for this answer. You know very well that the European Commission has just yesterday announced that it postpones the publication of its digital tax proposal, which was planned for still this July. So European Commission is basically telling the member states, let us wait, let us see how this develops, and let us try to have a common approach within the G20 and within the OECD. There's a specific question to Mr. Swieboda, because you have been dealing intensely with political issues related to the digital shift, and you are now in charge of building a large digital platform for brain research. The digitization is a non-reversible process, going through different phases of development and getting more and more politically sensitive as time goes by. What is, in your view, the immediate perspective? Do you see a global race for cyber domination? Who is the front runner? Would you say that the EU has any chances to catch up still? Or is this, let's say, tax a kind of first step in having a global approach to other domains as well, not only taxation? And is there a challenge to have non-democratic countries like China really questioning this world order, which is somehow perhaps coming slowly into being?
Thank you very much, Karel. You really packed a lot into that. So let me start with what you just said, namely that the digital transformation is not reversible. I think that's entirely true. What is more is that digital is really omnipresent, and that the onset of the real digital age might still be ahead of us, even though we often feel overwhelmed by the technological developments. So the iPhone has been around since 2007. Facebook has been around, as its vice president likes to say, since Federer started winning. So it's a few years back. But no, there will be next stage. Possibly it's going to be the wearables that will allow for seamless communication in the future. We see that technological revolution in science very visibly as well. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Economist a couple of weeks ago arguing that AI should receive the next Nobel Prize in medicine because of the incredible progress which AI brings. And it's true that last year we saw quite some spectacular new revelations, like the explaining of the folding of the proteins by DeepMind in London. Our own infrastructure is really pushing the needle in neuroscience, so allows brain researchers to study the whole populations of neurons in different parts of the brain, just as they were studying single neurons only a few years ago. So this pace of progress is incredible. And you rightly drew attention to the fact that there is, of course, accelerating global competition, as you would expect. Now, there is one issue that is very worrisome and one that is promising. The worrisome one is that the internet has already splintered. There was this big promise of a single global internet at the very beginning. Well, we now have different internets with the different rules of the game, be it China, be it Russia, be it Turkey, be it Europe or the US. So that is enormously worrisome. Now, the promise lies in the drive towards more competitive markets in digital, which is quite widespread as well. It's not just the European Union with its Digital Market Act, Digital Services Act. It's not the US, where we have now 5 drafts, legislative drafts. We have the executive order of President Biden coming up. It's also India with the very far-reaching legislation that is being proposed. It is China that is attempting to curb the excessive power of tech firms. And this is about restoring the level playing field. I drew attention to what Aura Sala just said, that we might see the emergence of the digital champions in Europe. Well, if competition is restored, that could well be the case. Because if you ask investors whether they would be willing to put the money into a large digital project today, very often they would say the conditions are not ripe, and the conditions are not ripe because there is no level playing field as we speak. Yeah. So the Commission is rightly acting on this. This is a new approach. In the few years before, it was attempted to steer the behavior of technological firms through fines. This didn't quite work because the fines were treated more as parking tickets, cost of doing business, and behavior was not changed. So now it's up to the regulatory shift that is happening. Now, where does Europe's promise lie? I think Europe is extremely strong in many markets, be it fintech, be it clean tech, be it also the car industry, which is software industry at the moment. But there's only one but, and that is that Europe is not seeing the emergence of large companies. Mm-hmm. This means competition rules have worked quite well in Europe, but it also means that we have less say over the shape of the market in the future. And if you look for one reason why this has been, that one reason is the difficulty in bringing innovation to the market. We are great in coming up with new ideas. We have excellent scientific potential, but something doesn't quite work when it comes to bringing things to the market. So if there was one wish I would have for Europe in the years to come, it's to address that very issue. Otherwise, we should be all fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have in mind just a little follow-up of the quite frequent complaint that all those excellent European startups which have great potential and they end up being bought by the Silicon Valley giants and not really making a career in the European market. Is that something which could be is there a remedy to that within the proposed legislation? Do you think that the Digital Service Act and the Digital Market Act are those pieces of legislation which could kind of bring a new way of doing things in the digital market in Europe?
I think they are extremely important. They are instrumental in getting us there. But it's also about the ability to scale up, because Europe has been quite effective in creating the right environment for startups. We have quite a lot of entrepreneurial drive in many countries, but there is still a barrier when it comes to growing companies. Moving from the startup phase into a scale-up phase remains difficult, and the single market issues are fundamental to that. But there is also the issue of funding, of rewarding shareholders, and these issues also have to address to enable the scale-up phenomenon to really have an impact on the European market.
Thank you. Coming back to security, Mrs. Kadlecová, it's a huge topic in the world of 21st century and a huge item on the agenda of many democratic countries and their organizations. In the last NATO summit, cybersecurity was a huge topic. Is it, in your view, possible to reach at some stage at least some basic, common global regulation for at least for the internet, or is it going to be more and more a battlefield?
Well, this is not an easy question because both is true. To be honest, there are initiatives when states and international organizations want to agree on a common standards, at least on the very basic ones. Just to name one, there is a great initiative which was started by the Netherlands on protection of the core of the internet, that no state should attack the core of the internet. So there are great initiatives on protection of the very basics. At the same time, we can see a bit of fragmentation, or rather division, in between two camps. And if I oversimplify it, we can say that we see a division between, let's say, Western and Eastern approach. The Western approach is a bit more multi-stakeholder approach, where a state or international organization is just one of the stakeholders, and there are also others like private sector, non-governmental non-governmental organizations, think tanks, and so on. But then we can also see the Eastern approach that is represented typically by China and Russia, where this model is very state-centric. And so these two camps try to promote their own vision of the common standards on this topic. And then there is, of course, a small group of so-called bandwagoning states, kind of undecided states, which, if I again oversimplify, didn't make up their mind yet which camp they will join, which side they will take. And very often, in fact, we are now in a very critical moment when it is not that much about negotiating the cyber norms, but really about persuading these undecided states to join one of these two camps. And very often it's not only about the values itself, but it's also about economical, political influence of these states. We can see it in Africa very typically, for instance. So just to wrap up, we can definitely see initiatives to agree on a common standard, at least to protect the very basics of the internet. At the same time, there's this fragmentation, and then, of course, cyberspace or the internet will always be the battlefield. We can see it in every day in the cyber attacks. Just 10 days ago, we saw one of the greatest ransomware attacks in the history of the internet or of cyberspace. So both is true. We are trying to reach some kind of agreement on the cyber norms, but at the same time, cyberspace or the internet will always be a battlefield, I believe.
That's very probable what you are saying, but anyway, when you speak about common standards, does that mean that there is, at a certain level, at the world stage, that there is some kind of understanding or beginning of understanding that these common standards could somehow be agreed upon? Because you have many of these huge cyber attacks are very probably organized by the states themselves. So, you know, that there seems to be a certain contradiction. How do you persuade those countries, the eastern ones, which you just mentioned, or some others, from behaving, so that they should stop behaving the way they are behaving? And how much freedom are the democratic countries ready to sacrifice for having a common deal with at the global level?
Well, I believe that it's not really about sacrification. It's rather about finding a common language on the issues, on common definition, common understanding of what is, for instance, the core of the internet. You mentioned that quite often these are state actors who attack. It's not necessarily a state actor. It can be also a non-state actor, perhaps financed by the state actor. right. That is very important to highlight, just not to attribute anything at this point. And as it comes to, again, going back to the word sacrification, I think it's rather about protection of our values, meaning when we are talking about the democratic states, freedom of speech, and so on. So there are initiatives already now, again, going back to the Netherlands. Netherlands is really a leader in international law sovereignty, international legal sovereignty, and they're trying to promote, they created these initiatives to find a common platform for countries from East and from West, but also these bandwagoning states I was mentioning before, to start working on the same projects, and through these projects try to find the common language or agreement on the very basics. And then when we agree on the common basics, such as the definition of the core of the internet, then we can build up on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, speaking about the freedom of speech, that brings me necessarily back to Facebook. So I will just have a little supplementary question, which you are probably, being asked very often, but we just profit from the fact that we are having you here with us today. So what a company like Facebook, how do you feel about your responsibility for the content which is published on Facebook? And I know that you are having your own controls, and many people are saying that it is not sufficient, it differs from one country to another. So would you be rather waiting for politicians to legislate, or are you ready to strengthen your proactive control, waiting perhaps for some kind of agreement at the political level as far as the freedom of speech on Facebook is concerned?
So let me be very clear, we are not waiting anything. We have taken many very substantial stands against hate speech and misinformation and disinformation in the last years. I can also assure you that we are not the same company we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Since I joined 2020 in May, I can already see that there has been a huge change what comes to, for example, COVID-19 misinformation and disinformation. We are able to take down 96% of harmful content on our platforms at the moment. So on misinformation, we flag it. And not only that, we direct people to facts. So we teamed up with different healthcare authorities in all 27 member states. So if you go to your newsfeed right now, you can find the COVID Misinformation Center, where you can find facts in your own language about COVID-19. And we are doing the same thing now with the vaccination denial groups. So we are acting daily basis. It's very clear that we don't allow racism, for example, or gender-based violence on our platforms. And we have taken in the recent years. But we don't think that is enough, because we should not be arbiters of truth alone. And that's why we are calling out democratically elected decision makers to make binding laws here. We welcome the limited liability regime in the DSA, and we think that it should remain there. However, there needs to be a clear definition: what is lawful, what is unlawful, and what is the content that can remain on social media platforms and what not. And here again, I would like to conclude saying that it would be great to have EU-level rules rather than 27 different rules in different member states.
Thank you for this conclusion. I think that is a good hint at the effort which is being put up by the European Commission. Mr. Markus, Estonia has acquired the reputation of being, in a way, the best in class as far as digitization of the public and private sphere is concerned. According to your experience, what are the assets of a substantially digitized state service, educational systems, administration, and so on? And what are the inconveniences, if there are, if any? How does a small country like Estonia, which is a very likely target for Russian cyber attacks, protect its cyberspace? Because as you know, if you grow more and more digital, the more and more vulnerable you become, in a way, at the same time. So do you think that the successful digital shift has created not only, advantages, but also problems?
I would certainly say that it has added challenges to our sphere. The first question was how do we do it? Yeah. I think one thing that has been used in Estonia quite extensively, that is currently taking up steam around the EU, is a public-private partnership. Estonia, quite frankly, did not have the money back then to go to Microsoft or any of those big companies and ask for them to digitalize all of our services. So we did cooperation with IT companies back home in Estonia, and this kept, number one, the costs low. That was the first target back then, but also it meant number one, it would be under our own regulatory framework, so all the Estonian companies would be aware of what the rules are, and number two, these days it means that they have a business card that says, hey, we've been implementing stuff on a national level for like 20 years. We can help other countries as well. The advantages have been unbelievable. So during COVID-19, the added resilience that we've had, having a legally binding digital signature, having online voting since 2005, we've seen, I mean, regardless of how we feel about it, we didn't have elections in Estonia during COVID, but we saw that there were elections. There was a vote on an Italian constitutional referendum last year that was being postponed, and there were French mayoral elections around the country that were being continued despite COVID going on. So in many of these situations, countries faced very uncomfortable decisions. Yeah. And thankfully, because of these digital services, because of our very, I would say, high baseline, we wouldn't have had to make some of those uncomfortable choices. Does it come with some disadvantages? I would say overall, no, because digitalization is, I mean, if you are being tasked with digging a hole with your hands and somebody gives you a shovel to do it, would you say, oh, but what are the negative implications of the shovel? So it's, not quite necessarily. But does it add challenges? Absolutely. So number one is that in Estonia, everybody has a digital identity. And this means that the is digitalized first. There are not a lot of paper-based data sets in Estonia left. And this means that the amount of information that one could theoretically get in Estonia is higher than in most countries. But I would say that this has helped spawn very successful companies in Estonia in the area of cybersecurity, actually, sitting here next to me. This is always work in progress. You will never be immune against cyber attacks just as much as you are never immune against any physical attack. If we're talking about today's challenges, we're talking about blockchain and so on. That's great. We've been using blockchain for almost 10 years now, before it was cool. But what we are thinking about these days is quantum immunity. How can we make sure that once quantum computers can be used for malicious intents, that we are ready for that? So that's stuff that we have to deal with already today.
Thank you. You wanted to add something?
Just very quickly, I wanted to support and add on top of what Florian just said, that Estonia is really forward-looking country, a pioneer as it comes to digitalization, and also they kind of try to predict, which is admirable in the sense that, for instance, look at digital embassies. Estonia came up with the concept of digital embassies already 4 or 5 years ago. They already implemented at least one in Luxembourg. So this is definitely, and I will not talk about it too much because we are running out of time, but it's definitely a thing when you are interested in digital sovereignty to look up and learn a bit more about that, digital embassies.
Thank you. Well, not every country is Estonia. And what we are witnessing here in Europe today is that we have a growing gap. On one hand, we have debates like the one we are having now. I think that there is at least, well, a very high percentage of European population who would not really be understanding what we are talking about at this moment. You have more and more people who somehow are able to use their smartphone and they are able to somehow, be on Facebook and so on, but they do not really understand what's going on. And this gap is growing and it is becoming a real societal problem. Mr. Swieboda, do you think that this is something, this digital, let's say, illiteracy, which is a kind of challenge for our societies?
It is an enormous challenge, and what Florian just described makes us think that a lot of our institutions are really rooted in the 20th century or even before, in the 19th century. There are parliaments in Europe where you still have to raise your hand. You cannot even press a button. And Florian was telling us about online voting going on at large scale in Estonia. So somehow, I would say our democracy has not yet been taken entirely into the digital age. And that is something that must happen in order for our citizens to feel part of this exercise. So that is a must. It is happening, but at a slow stage, probably because the age of techno-optimism has been quickly replaced by techno-pessimism, and we now need to restore the balance. We have to find the middle ground somewhere in between. But empowering citizens through digital means has to be part of that agenda.
Would you agree that, any of you, that this last 2-year period with the pandemics and people being on home office, and kids being at home and so on, was that something that helped somehow to improve the digital or media and digital literacy of the population? And is that something we should be building upon? And perhaps we are not doing it, it is not being done, that this opportunity is not being grasped by the politicians sufficiently?
Yeah, I'll just take very quickly the floor. Absolutely, it helped, even if not on a very thorough basis that all of a sudden all 65-year-olds understand what blockchain is and how it all works. But at least on a user level, that there is a higher degree of education. That's good, and also something that you might also talk about for a second is cyber hygiene. So we've been teaching our, for generations, the kids to wash your hands before you eat, after you go to the bathroom, and so on. And to do the same thing for the cyberspace would be absolutely critical, and I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. Hands up if anybody here would like to go back 100% to the physical office world. I don't see a single hand raised. So I think that there is no going back from what we've experienced. Some may prefer 50-50 or something, but the flexibility in the digital sphere has certainly improved.
Right. Thank you. Well, we have come... Yeah, please. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
So,
go ahead, Ms. Sala.
I think, this debate around media literacy is crucial, but I would like to say that we are working really closely with the European Commission and different NGOs, different companies to address more broadly digital citizenship, because we believe that it's media literacy, combining that with digital literacy and awareness of quality journalism. Because how we changed our services already 3 years ago, 4 years ago, was that we wanted people on our platforms first, post of their friends and families, because that's the content that people actually want to see on our platforms. And we also established this new news tab so that quality journalism, let's say BBC, Financial Times, Reuters, Helsingin Sanomat, they can have their own news feed where you can have reliable sources of news. And we are negotiating with publishers in different member states, because we believe that it's very important also for our children to learn to read news from these reliable resources. So we are working really closely with civil society to address these challenges we are having, and happy to also engage closely with many of people here in the audience and also in the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm being told that we are supposed to be coming to the end of this discussion, so I hope that it gave you a flavor of the challenges lying ahead in this very important and really crucial area, and policy-making area in Europe. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to the speakers for your availability and your very interesting contributions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you as well, Carol, for moderating the panel. Thanks to our guests for sharing their insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, we'll be having another short break for snacks and drinks for 15 minutes, and then we'll be back with another VIP panel with another guest, the Czech minister. So we'll be back at 2 p.m. and I'll be looking forward to seeing you all back. Thank you.